fun.
And yeah, they're all excited about vacation. It's just not vacation.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, yeah, and pray for us. We'll be on the road Tuesdays when we're going to go now. We're going to go Tuesday, and then we'll be back hopefully next Monday. But this is the first trip really we're doing overnights on the way because we just don't feel we can do this. You know, and I don't want to end up in rest stops anymore for sleep. So, plus we have the dog with us. All right, well, good to have everybody. We're missing a few, so if you can think to reach out. Jen said that Miss Peggy's not been feeling well, so we want to keep her in prayer. And then Caroline Kennedy, we want to keep her in prayer. Any encouragement you can give for the ladies to come, that would be just wonderful. But we will get into our Sunday school lesson this morning, and I'm going to ask Tiff to open us up in a word of prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful day that you've given us. Thank you that we can all be here together, and for those that are watching online, thank you, Father, that they could join in as well. And dear Father, I just want to thank you for the beauty that you surround us with outside, and the beauty of having friendships and fellowship and the ability to come here to worship you, Father. I thank you for that. Lord, I want to pray also for our Sunday school teachers and for the pastor as he brings our messages, and they bring the message that you've laid on their hearts as well. Help our hearts to be soft and tender and open to your word, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. All right, so today's Sunday school lesson is one that I've had on my mind for a few weeks. Not that title, that just came to me not last night or this morning or sometime in between. But the story of Michal. Does anyone know if I'm saying her name right? David's wife? Could be Michal, could be, you just hear it different ways. My husband, I think he said Michael. So, Michal. We'll go with Michal. All right. Kind of sounds like a guy, but I don't know. All right, so the title of today's lesson is called Loose Lips Sink Ships. So words are one of the most important forces that human beings have. There's a lot of power in the word. And words have the power too, and I stole this from somebody, this part right here. Words have the power to help, to heal, to harm, to humiliate, and to humble. And I thought that was really good. I liked all the H's with it. The words we choose today play a big part in where we will be in our life tomorrow. Remember, as we talk about words through this lesson, that it first begins with our thoughts. And we'll turn real quick to Proverbs 23:7. Going to go to some different verses today as we talk about this. Proverbs 23:7, focus on B. A. Yeah, I put B, but it's actually A. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. You know, the things that come out of our mouth, they come out of our mouth because that's what's in our heart. You know, I even tell my husband, when somebody's joking with you, there's still truth in jokes.
Yeah, because they're trying to deflect what you're
doing. Right. So don't ever make a joke and have it be totally opposite of what you really feel, because really it does show feeling. It does show how some of your heart is. So anyway, that's just, you know, when someone jokes with me about something and it's totally off the wall, I have to understand that there is some truth in that it is in that heart somewhere, because it came out, even if it's by a joke. So, did you want to say something, Carol?
No.
Oh, okay.
But that's so true.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, what you said.
So we just want to think of that. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. And then it goes, your thoughts become your words become your actions. Has anyone ever heard that before? We heard it from a preacher somewhere. My husband had it written down. But yeah. So we're going to meet Michal. I don't like that.
Just call her.
Let's call her Michelle. let's call her Michelle, yeah.
Send it off down.
All right, I know. It's just, all right, so let's meet Michelle. Let's go with it. So 1 Samuel 18, let's turn there. Hard to talk about her being a wife and a woman and all that. I'm calling her Michael.
Back then, in that time period.
Yeah.
would have been-
I know, everything was kind of different. I mean, I told you how the Bible's just been coming alive for me. It's like a storybook playing out. And really, it's a very interesting story when you think about it, because it's not really like things are now, you know. And God didn't necessarily put his stamp of approval on everything they did. We have to understand that we're like, oh, whoa, why did God let that happen? Well, actually, some of that was man, and they decided to do some of this stuff. So 1 Samuel 18, 27 through 38. Well, let's see here.
Wait a minute.
That's bad news.
You think you
Yeah,
challenge
30.
All right, we'll just make that a 0. I'm telling you, I'm the best proofer in them.
1 Samuel 28?
1 Samuel 18.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's right.
1 Samuel 18, verse 27 to 30, verses 27 to 30. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. So Michal is Saul's daughter and becomes David's wife. And this is kind of, I've got like a little timeline going here that we're going to kind of go over, just so that we can keep these things in our head to get to the end game down the bottom. So we want to remember that Michal loved David. So there's another, if you go over to 1 Samuel, and you don't have to turn there, 1 Samuel 19, verses 9 to 18. Okay, this is where Saul has started to hunt, and we've talked about this last few weeks. Saul has started to hunt David like an animal. And so he's running. And, you know, his wife, Saul sends his men to David's house because he's going to kill him right there. And Michal says, oh no, you know, she gets wind of it or something, and she knows what's going to happen. So she tells David to leave, and she makes like a dummy. You ever seen the movie Alcatraz or the story Alcatraz, where they make the dummies and put them in the bed? Well, that's what she did. And she fooled the king's men with it so that they come in. So it bought him a little bit of time. And then her dad chewed her out and said, well, why did you do this? You know, but he understands, even it said here that Saul knew that the Lord was with David, and he knew that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So she put him above her dad. But her dad was in the wrong. Her dad was doing wrong, and David was her husband. So keep that in mind. And then the next point, David then goes on the run as Saul continues to hunt him down. But it's important to keep in mind that when David ran, he had to leave Michal behind. He didn't take her with him. I mean, that's probably not the best idea, you know, to take her while he's running for his life, because he's trying to avoid death. So he did that. However, while he's gone, David does find time to marry 2 more wives while running. So this is where the Bible becomes like this story that comes alive, because if we're not careful, we can gloss over and miss it. Like you can read, you can read it 100 times, and then something like this just kind of grabs you and says, whoa, wait a minute. He didn't go back and get Michal. He left her there because he wanted her safe, right? And because he was running. But he finds time to, to still marry a couple others. And we'll see more down bottom where he keeps on marrying. So, however, he does find time to marry 2 more wives while running. So it would be Abigail, and the other one starts with a J. I can't remember. Can you?
No.
I can't remember. And then while he's gone, Saul gives Michelle to another man, Faulty or something, to marry. How sad is this? So David's on the run. He leaves his wife behind to be safe. Saul hates David, is gunning for him. And so he's like, well, we're going to take care of this. You're going to marry Faulty. And so she's given to another man to marry. I tried to put myself in her shoes. Like, this is a lot to go through. I think women in the Bible times, they had a lot to go through anyway. You know, when we look at customs and we looked at, there's just some things where I go, wow, I'm glad I'm not living back then. I'm glad I'm living today. But I did try to put myself in her shoes because it'll help a little bit to understand later why she does what she does. Okay, so, and that's 1 Samuel 25, verses 42 to 44, where she's given to another man to marry. And then David continues to run. You know, Saul's still hunting him, so he's still running. Then Saul dies, and David becomes king of Judah. Now, David's not yet king of all Israel. He's king of Judah. And Ishbosheth, Saul's son, is king, quote unquote. Pastor and I were having a discussion about how we think Ishbosheth was a wimpy man. But he's the current king of Israel, and David becomes king of Judah. Next point, David sends messengers to Ishbosheth to retrieve Michelle. Finally, he's like, I guess I'm good to go. I can take my other wife now. Mind you, he's got the other 2 wives he procured during this time. But he's now finally ready for Michelle. And let's just read that, 2 Samuel 3:13 through 16. And he said, he's talking to Abner here. Abner, this is why Pastor and I were talking about Ishbosheth maybe being a wimpy man. Abner gets mad at Ishbosheth, and Pastor thinks that Abner decided that Abner decided, you know what, I'm tired of Ishbosheth. He is not very manly here. He just accused me of being with these women, and so we think that he, you know, and Pastor said, well, I just think Ishbosheth wasn't very manly, and that Abner was manly, and he did not like it. And finally, he's like, you know what? David's a real man. I'm going to turn and go to David. So that's where he is here. So Abner seeks an alliance with David. And David says in verse 13, he said, well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is this, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michelle, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. It's interesting how he didn't say, thou first bring Michelle, my wife. Verse 14, and David sent messengers to Ishbosheth's son, saying, deliver me, here he says it, my wife Michelle, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. All right, so he's finally sent for Michelle. And then you have to keep in mind, the bullet under there is keep in mind that Michelle is taken from Faulty, and he follows weeping. We talked about this another week. How sad is this? He loved her so much. I don't know about her. The Bible doesn't say that she cried. But put yourself in her shoes. You're being taken back on what, a carriage, something, you know, obviously not a car or anything like that. So a carriage, chariot, something. She is the king's son, or the king's daughter. And so she's being taken back. She's just been abducted, really, from her home that she has made. I don't know how long this is, how long that she was with him. But he obviously loved her a great deal because he followed the chariot or the wagon or whatever crying. I don't know what she did. I was just picturing her like sitting there. You know, when it comes to what the king wants, and when soldiers come and get you, how are you going to fight that? And so it just makes me very, very sad that for the way it played out. But so he follows her weeping till he's sent home. We don't know how she felt about it. And then David then becomes king of all Israel in 2 Samuel 5, verses 3 to 5. 2 Samuel 5, 3 to 5 says, So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And this is what God wanted. God wanted David to be king. And Saul knew it, and that's why he went crazy. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. So David had a 40-year reign. Again, following the timeline here, underneath the David then becomes king of all Israel. Jerusalem is conquered and is called the city of David. David now, so now he's got the wife whose name begins with J that I can't remember.
It's, if I may,
Sure.
Ahinoam. It's Ahinoam from Jezreel.
Okay. Maybe that's why I was thinking it was J, from Jezreel.
I was
Her
looking
name
that
is
one up
Ahinoam?
when I seen that.
Good. So it's Ahinoam?
Ahinoam.
Ahinoam. So he's got her from Jezreel. He's got Abigail. He went and got Michelle. And so now he decides, now I'm settling in. The city's going to be named after me. Time to get me some more wives and concubines. And that's what he does. And I keep going back and thinking of Michelle coming, being brought, following her and weeping. She gets brought to the palace, to King David, and he still goes out and gets more wives. And this is what they did then. Not saying it's right, but this is what they did. So then the next bullet, and thank you for that, Tiff, that was good. David attempts to move the ark back to Jerusalem. So Uzziah, while they've got it on oxen, Uzziah attempts to steady, add my Y on the paper, to steady the ark when it was shaken by the oxen. Uzziah grabs the ark because he doesn't want it to fall, but God smotes him dead because he wasn't supposed to do that. And it's all David's fault?
Because he was with the Philistines. He spent time among the Philistines, and they influenced him because that's how they transported the ark when
Yep.
they had it was on a cart.
That's good, Leah. Thanks for that. So, God killed him. So David backs off and says, whoa, we're just going to leave the ark here then. We don't want anyone else killed. So they put it in the house of Obed-Edom, a Gizite, is that what he was? For 3 months. But then somebody runs and tells David and said, man, you're not going to believe how blessed Obed-Edom's house is. He is just getting his socks blessed off. And David's like, oh man, we need to bring that here. So he goes and gets them, and they make sacrifices along the way, like every 6 paces, and they bring it back. So now, all that timeline, I wanted to go over all that because it kind of brings us to this point where it's 2 Samuel. Let's go to chapter 15 and see if that's where it is. Man, I need someone to proof my papers. I think when I was changing things, I took the chapter out. If you find it, tell me. I'm looking for where.
Well, David's desiring to build the Lord's house is chapter 7.
No, I'm looking for when Michelle, after they bring the Ark of the Covenant back. Okay, so it's going to be right here.
That's in chapter 6.
All right, Yep, so chapter 6, and we want to look at,
15?
yeah, let's go ahead and read verses 15 and read it to 23. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. It's a happy day. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Take notice that this is the gal who loved David, and she made a dummy doll for the bed so he could escape out, and she did that in defiance to her father. And yet here this verse says, verse 16, the last part of it, and she despised him in her heart. Remember that it first begins with our thoughts. And verse 17, and they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in his place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end of offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well to the women as men, to everyone a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed, every one to his house. This was a happy, happy day. Verse 20, then David returned to bless his household. And I believe they all came out and probably were down to meet him at the door. I believe it wasn't, this next part, I don't believe it was in private. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself. She was very mocking and very scornful. 21, and David said unto Michal, it was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and before all of his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord. And by play, he meant reverencing the dancing unto the Lord, all that stuff. It was leaping and it was joyous and it was really wonderful. There was nothing to be shamed about. 22, he says, and I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight. And of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Verse 23 is so sad to me. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. I think there's different commentaries out there. Some say that she was barren, that she just couldn't have kids. I don't think that David ever went into her again.
I think as a king, he had the right to kill her right there.
Yeah,
Because she,
but I think she was more miserable living.
yeah, and he felt that that was the best
Yep.
way. And I
And
think
it's just so sad, but her loose lips, they made her lonely the rest of her life. I believe she lived in that palace, and she saw David go in and out to wives and concubines, and she saw the women having children all over. And David, I don't think he ever went into her again because of what she said. She was so scornful and mean. Because remember, that says, and she despised him in her heart. You know, that's pretty strong wording. She wasn't just like, oh man, what's he doing? You know, you ever had a time when, well, like, maybe honey, you shouldn't have done that. No, she despised him. And so I have been thinking, okay, you know, think of everything she's been through. But to be honest, all the women went through a lot, I think. First of all, it's just a rough time to live. Then be a woman in all that. Abigail's husband, you know, he died, and she was kind of taken from her home. Not kind of, she was taken from her home, and she married David, and I believe he was good to her and all that. But it seems very, very different with Michal. She did love him at first, like they fell in love. or at least she did. She loved him. And then she despised him. And what was in her heart came out her mouth. And she paid a very, very dear price for it. She was a hurt woman. To me, this is a great example of bitterness. She couldn't do anything about her circumstances. It is a much different day and age back then than it was now. She really couldn't do anything about her circumstances. Look at Esther. Esther had a lot happen to her. Ruth had a lot happen to her, but you don't see the bitterness that we see take root here. And you knew she was bitter by what she said, mocking. And she spake what was in her heart. Luke 6:45b says, "For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh." That's why I said when we tell a joke or something like that, we actually share a little bit about what's in our heart, whether we think so or not. You know, my husband, he has said before, no, that was just a joke. And I'd be like, no, it came from somewhere, you know. Well, that's where it comes from. It comes
I like those
from your
jokes
heart.
where people tell the truth, say something truthfully, and they're, oh, I'm just joking.
No. There's always an element of truth. And I thought, again, I don't think she did this in private from what it says, because he came to bless his household. And it says, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet. So I'm kind of picturing everybody, you know, when my husband came home from Korea and we took him home and the kids come running out and his parents were come out to see him and stuff, you know, to greet him and love on him. But that's not what she had for him. She had some nasty, nasty words to say to the king in front of everybody. He was king.
I was reading the Bible this morning, and I was reading in Numbers. I think it's in 30s. I can't remember exactly the chapter, but it says, you know, your sin will find you.
Yeah, be
So-
sure your sin will find you out. That's right. And it's amazing how what is in our heart is going to come out. I mean, you can only hide it for so long. There are people who think they really have it down as far as what they should say outwardly, how they should dress outwardly, what they should say outwardly, how they should conduct themselves. But eventually they're going to slip up and you really see who they really are. You know, I don't know why the word current administration keeps coming to my mind. We're really seeing what they really are, but Tiff.
She started out as Saul's daughter, given to David, whom she loved dearly. Saul tries to kill David, so David flees. She has done what she could to save him, to keep him safe, but finally he has to flee. And so he's out running. She still loves David with all her heart. Now he's taking other women as wives. That had to have hurt. She would have heard about that.
And
she's given to another man,
who obviously adores her.
and he probably loved on her. Now she's getting ripped out of that again and put back with her first husband, but I'm sure there's a conflict in emotion and pain. She's having to say goodbye to a man who has loved her.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's going back here, and he's still getting more husband or more wives
and
and
concubines.
stuff. And so she's no longer
Number one.
the love of his heart. And that had to have caused jealousy
And the bitterness.
and sadness and loneliness, and that just festers.
This
and
is
thus that could have led
I
up.
was thinking.
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
She thought he could have fought harder for her.
well. That's what my husband said. He should have gone back for her at some time before he went and took other wives. He shouldn't have left her there, you know. And so that was not good on his part. But the end result, and walking through, this is why we don't want to gloss over things, but let God in His living word jump out at us. Is this not interesting? This is very interesting to think about, like, why on earth, and she despised him in her heart. It's not really hard to see why, but it still doesn't make it okay.
Right.
It
right.
didn't help her. And then her loose lips sunk her ship for her whole life. It might have felt really good being that nasty. Have you ever said something? And I was thinking too, I've had people tell me, I just speak my mind. I'm just a person who speaks my mind.
Hopefully not all the
Well,
time.
loose lips sink ships, so you may get into trouble if you just do that. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee if
have
that's
gotten
your
in trouble.
motto in life,
I have before. Where I was saying
then
yes.
you're going to get in trouble. Yeah. We need to watch the things we say. So while that may have been very gratifying to come out and sneer, and you can hear it in what she says to King David, her husband, whether he did her wrong or not.
Yeah, she shouldn't have done.
She should have bit her tongue. But it was, it was so, her heart was so filled with this. She despised him in her heart. Her heart was so filled with this bitterness that out it came, and that sneering. And David didn't just stand and let her say what she wanted. He's like, no problem. No problem. Didn't like what you saw? Don't like me anymore? Okay. And she lived all of her life alone.
I wonder if she just does like we do and just constantly, me myself, 'cause I'm not going to say for somebody else, I don't know that. But anyways, just constantly turn over your brain, you're like, I could say that, but really is it going to help me? Nope, not.
Well-
Revert it back. Before I would just say it.
And sadly enough, Jen, and this happens to us too, sadly enough, Michelle had the whole rest of her life to think about what she said, as she never was with him again. And obviously, she wasn't with other men. She was still left in there, like Miss Donna said, he could have killed her. That would have been, the normal thing to do. Rebuke him in front of people. It's bad enough in private, but in front of people, he could have had her killed. But I think this was a way worse punishment, and then she had her memories of faulty. So it's just, the power of our words is really unbelievable. And what consequences can come from our words. We need to, first of all, we need to understand that it begins in our heart, in our thought life. That's where the words come from. People don't say words that they didn't think about, that's not in their heart and not in their thoughts. It's a procession. So we have to understand, as we daily talk to people, as we daily say things, as we have arguments, which we inevitably do with people, we want to make sure that we do not say things, that sink our ship. And, a wife can destroy their marriage this way. Children and parents can destroy relationships this way by, I'm going to get something off my chest. Have you heard that? And I just say what I feel, so I'm an open book, and no, those are all excuses for being mouthy women.
Yeah.
And I get it, but it's not going to take away the consequences. Once it's done, it's done. You have to live with the consequences, just like she did.
I know I'm changing the subject drastically, but Mary, the mother of Jesus, she pondered things in her heart. I picked that up immediately because she's what God called. Look down on the earth, and she was chosen above everybody, and she's the one who pondered things in her heart.
That's very good. I want to say it in case our online friends didn't hear it. The right thing to do is like Mary did. That's been one of my favorite verses. We've talked about that, how Mary pondered things in her heart. She had terrible things happen. She had to watch her son get crucified. And it must have been a very interesting life living with Jesus. It just had to, She had a very, very different life. Yeah, and then up to her, she just had a very interesting life and heartaches. And then she lived through ridicule and people saying terrible things about her when she did become pregnant. And she knew, but people didn't believe her. So anyway, but she pondered those things in her heart. And she allowed the Lord to help her work through them. She didn't have loose lips that sunk her ship. Neither did, you know, sometimes I think of Naomi was kind of like borderline loose lips. You remember Naomi and Ruth? You know, and she's, oh, call me Mara, you know. I've told you, I just read that, and I get her story, but yet I'm like, you know, she's like, oh, girls, even if I had a son tonight, would you wait for him, you know, however long? Would you wait for him? No, you won't. Go home. Go back to your gods that your family was teaching you about. So I think she's borderline loose lips because I think she said a little bit too much, where she should have just, you know, pondered things in her heart like, yeah, I'm hurting. God, I should call myself bitter. But no, she, drama mama.
I wonder if maybe that has some influence of why her other daughter-in-law didn't follow her.
Oh, I think it is. I taught a Sunday school lesson on that. I really believe that that Naomi did the wrong thing when she told her daughter-in-laws to go back to the world. That's what she did. And thankfully, Ruth said no. But Orpah, she refused at first, and then Naomi was insistent. So she went back, and she went back to living the life that they lived there, that she lived with her parents, which was pagan, instead of serving God. And I just really think that that was one area where, and it all ended up right in the end. But what about Orpah? We never heard about Orpah. Well, what about Michelle? We don't ever hear about Michelle again. This is it. This is it. She's done. She's living her lonely life because she mouthed off and said things. Man, that's convicting. Because what we say does have consequences. Words, they're more than that saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. Try telling this gal that after she shot off of the mouth and thought that felt good, and then David came and said what he did. And I know she knew. She knew right then and there what that meant to have him say that to her. But I bet she spent her time hoping, maybe trying to lure him back in, trying to attract him back in. But the Bible says the daughter of Saul had no child unto the day of her death. I don't think he was ever with her again. She sunk her ship with that. Jen?
I had something kind of similar, but not exactly. Happened to me this week. I come home from work and I was aggravated because I was working late hours. I'm like, I don't really want to be at work this long and blah, blah, blah. And Nick wasn't home because he works second now. And I was like, he didn't even fix me anything to eat because I'm spoiled.
Yes, you are.
I'm like, he didn't even fix me anything to eat. I'm really upset with, and I said, I don't understand him. Why can he be that dumb? And I just kept on going. My mouth kept on going. And then I get to the TV and there's a note and it says, here's the card with some money on it. Go get you something. I thought, oh, Lord help me.
Yeah, Jen,
Convicted right there.
that's a good example. I hope those online could hear that. That's a great example.
That was bad. I'm glad he didn't hear me say it, Nick.
We need to be more like Mary and ponder things in our heart and not say everything we think. First of all, if you have very many of those thoughts, we really need to evaluate our heart condition. Because, you know, if you're having those thoughts all the time, it's because it's what's in your heart. Now, we are human, and sometimes we're going to have cranky thoughts. I'll say it that way, cranky thoughts. But those shouldn't be all the time. That shouldn't be what comprises my mind. And we have to make conscious decisions not to say anything. We're going to bring you in one of the other chairs.
Bring her in one of those chairs and put it right there.
Yeah. So, you know, I wonder, I stopped and thought about, I wonder what Michelle's life would have been like if she hadn't have said that. Like what would it, you know, she could have had an awesome life with David, with King David. And maybe things wouldn't have turned out. Okay, so here's a thought. Maybe David would have been so enamored with her, he wouldn't have gone after Bathsheba. You know, and then we wouldn't have King Saul. I get all that, but David sinned a great sin there. I don't know. You know, you just don't know. But Michelle was his wife, and she didn't really. I mean, this could be taught at a ladies' conference about how we're supposed to speak and the things that we should say, and that we have to understand there are repercussions. There are, sinking ships because of things we say, when how much more better it is to be merry and ponder it in our heart. I told you about that friend we had in Pennsylvania once, that his name was Bob. He barely said anything. He would he'd come to our house, hang around us, and like we'd sit down with him, and it was awkward because he didn't say anything. But so many times over the years, I've thought about the wisdom in how he handled his tongue. He didn't say things he regret, and I said things all the time I regretted, and he did come out of his shell a little bit, but he still always was very careful about what he said. That is so much better than to be loose lips.
That's my Uncle Bob. He's a very quiet man.
Being friendly is one thing, being loose lips is another.
It is. Sometimes I'm guilty of this, trying to fill the space, and it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I used to be that way, Jen. And probably once in a while I still am, but I've learned that silence is okay.
I've come more silent in the last couple of years because Nick's not a talker unless you've been talking about what he wants to.
Or I guess it
Maybe use the word for
I was-
together the best.
Probably.
I was going to
I'm
say
a talker,
that
he's not a talker.
this is so, everything's so negative in a way. The positive was your comment about Mary, pondering it in her heart, allowing the Lord to help her with this. Another way to combat the loose lips is by filling your heart up with good things, singing songs to the Lord, thinking ways of helping others.
Awesome.
And instead of focusing inward of woe is me and stuff like this, to help prevent this
Yep.
happening.
There are
is to fill up your heart.
some verses at the bottom. I don't know, probably don't have time to go to them. Well, we do. Tiff, take the first one. Jen, take Proverbs 15:4. Aaliyah, Proverbs 10:19. Donna, James 1:19. And I'll do Proverbs 15:23. And Miss Carol, do you want to do Proverbs 15:1? All right. And as soon as you have it, read it.
Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding.
Even a fool's counted wise when he stays quiet. Next.
A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness therein is a breach in the spirit.
A wholesome tongue is a tree of life. There's life in a wholesome tongue. That's a beautiful thought. Just think of branches and stuff coming out of your mouth because your mouth is wholesome. Next.
In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin,
Boy, that's
but
like
he
my life
that
verse.
refraineth his lips is wise.
That's like my life verse. Really. Because when I used to talk all the time, Jen, that is the verse that God used to help me with that. To understand that, Julie, the more you talk, the more likely you are to sin in what you're saying. And it's very true. And then we had Bob, who never talked and didn't seem to sin a lot with his words, So, next.
Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath.
Slow to speak. Julie, be slow to speak. If we're slow to speak, we won't sink our ship. Carol, do you have one?
A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous
Yep.
words stir up anger.
Yep. So true. And then I have 15:23. A man hath joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. Michelle's words were not spoken in due season. It was not a beautiful picture. It would have been better, like she could have said later when she was with David privately, she said, help me to understand because it looked like a show. And he could have, that wouldn't be so bad. But we know where that came from because it says she despised him in her heart. So that's where her words came from. Proverbs 15:1. You read that one, yep.
Yeah.
James 3:10. Anyone got that one?
Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be.
Yep. We need to be careful of our words. Let's remember, Michelle, when we go to say something that would be best not said. Our ship, we won't sink our ships. If we're not saying it, we won't sink our ships. If we just always try to make the habit of, okay, here's a good saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
I've made myself signs of that before.
Her whole life would have been different. What about ours? All right. Thank you, ladies. I'm going to turn off now.